in the 70s and 80s, the most sexist commercials were coffee commercials, old-fashioned coffee commercials, where the testament was the mom or the female had to make good coffee. And the point was he never, it's so good he has a second cup. Okay. That's the joke in the movie. So there's constantly this run of your coffee, you make coffee so well that the husband will have a second cup. Okay. And that was the gag. That's why it's supposed to be funny that the airplane coffee is so good. Okay. And she gets insulted. I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast.
And I'm Kyle from GoetheReviews.com. And we are talking Airplane here because we're kind of, we finished our month of disaster movies and going through all these different things. So like the right way to talk about it is to do Airplane.
Yeah, correction. It's Airplane!
Oh yeah, that's true. So today on Kyle and Nick on Film, Airplane! Welcome back to the show. I'm one of your hosts, Kyle Goethe.
I'm Nick from the St. Paul Filmcast, and today we're going to talk about the classic. Of course, you do disaster films, and what's going to end the genre or the style is a parody of it.
Absolutely. I think, and I've talked about parody a lot before because it's one of my favorite and one of the most difficult subgenres to do of any kind, is that when you make a good parody film, you have to love the source material. You have to really have a fascination with what you're making fun of. That's what makes Mel Brooks so insanely successful, is because he loves Frankenstein, so he made great Young Frankenstein. He loves
Star Wars,
Western, Star Wars. Yeah. You have to really care about what you're making, or it's ultimately meaningless.
Yeah. So Airplane, even though it concentrates on the entire disaster genre, but it's old-fashioned comedy that comes back new. So it's a lot of the 50s and 40s, when Milton Berle and Jerry Lewis jokes of build them up, knock them down, or the punch, or you don't know where that's coming from. So, and another key of this is this comes out a couple months before Caddyshack. Okay. And Caddyshack uses a lot of well-known comedians, right? Very famous comedians. In fact, like Rodney Dangerfield. Here, they intentionally cast people that weren't comedic.
That's true. Yeah, it was the goal was, again, and that's something that really wasn't done at the time, and isn't even that often done now. When you make a film that's parodying something, again, to make it with a comedic sensibility in the script, but make it like you're making a serious movie. It's a brilliant way of going about it, and honestly, we wouldn't have Lloyd Bridges, his later part of his life being all around comedy. We wouldn't have Leslie Nielsen. Right. Even Peter Graves, never really, tilted into comedy, but he was able to kind of have a bit more of a laugh at himself and just kind of work later on in life because of this movie, because of what came about. What's interesting is the way that this film actually was conceived. So during making of the Kentucky Fried movie and other spoof kind of stuff that the
very politically incorrect country.
So Zucker's Abraham and Zucker, who I call Zaz, basically
surprised they're not lawyers.
Yeah, they would record infomercials and stuff overnight and then make fun of them with Kentucky Fried Movie. Yeah, and they accidentally recorded 0 Hour one night. Which is a 1957, I think, black and white airplane film.
It was made for television.
Yeah, and so they recorded it overnight with not knowing it, and ended up watching it and was really taken by just this kind of the way that they could make fun of this. So it was originally conceived as just a short for the Kentucky Fried sequel, which never actually happened. When that film fell apart, they morphed it into Airplane.
So if you didn't know 0 Hour, it was a made-for-TV television movie where a guy named Ted Stryker, who was a fighter pilot in World War II, has to fly a commercial plane. And his name is Ted Stryker in the movie 0 Hour. And it was played by Dana Andrews, who was the catalyst for the catastrophe in Airport 75.
Oh, that's correct. Okay, yeah.
So there's a little bit of, overlapping. Like Peter Graves was best friends with Jack Smite, who directed two of the airport films.
Oh, yeah. Well, and not only that, they were concerned with the amount of jokes they were making that were so geared towards 0 Hour that they actually had the studio purchase the rights to remake the film. That is, essentially, Airplane is a remake.
So according to the movie producers' accountants, it's a remake.
That's how they had to go about it, because they were so worried they'd get sued. And they almost did get sued, actually, by the Universal Pictures when they tried to get George Kennedy and Helen Reddy to be in the film as characters. Universal actually threatened to sue them over Airport 1975, which we kind of talked about as being very similar to what Airplane ended up being. Yeah. So it could have been
a home run
very
if you got
different
George
way.
Kennedy in Airplane, right? Yeah. So a lot of the jokes still work very well. So a lot of the stuff that is kind of present of that when the film is made, doesn't really translate very well. For instance, a lot of the when you go to airport in the late 70s, you'll be bombarded with religious solicitations constantly. And that was a great relief when people see they go, yeah, we always wanted to do that to those people. And not to mention, there was a TV show called Point Counterpoint.
Oh, yes.
So there was a news program about the pros. It was Point Counterpoint where pro, let's rescue the airplane. And the counterpoint, well, let them crash.
Yes,
It doesn't really, people don't, a lot of people who don't grow up at that time doesn't really understand it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and of course the coffee jokes, right?
That's one of the few jokes I had to look up. That I remember at some point looking up, I was like, I know I've seen something like this before, and they make it, there's a point counterpoint thing in another film that actually was part of why I searched for it.
Yeah.
What I love about this movie, and in fact, I would say it's a top 10 comedy of all time for me, is that I can watch it at any time in my life. It's usually like a sick day movie. I have trouble figuring out what movies are sick day movies, but that is a movie where if I wake up not feeling well and I'm in the bed all day, I will watch Airplane. And even revisiting it right before this episode, I decided after I finished watching it to look at people on YouTube who are doing first-time watches, because there's not a whole lot of people breaking down this movie on YouTube. There's a lot of people watching it for the first time. And I had a grin across my face just watching other people watch it for the first time. Like in today's setting, I still laughed along with them, and I was like overjoyed just watching them watch the film.
We're gonna have a siren go on. We're gonna do this so perfect for the air.
Yeah.
But anyways, so there's a lot of homages to the old-fashioned movie. In fact, there was a flashback of Casablanca almost, and then it turns into a disco bar, and it just goes on the way out too, and they demonstrate that as well. But yeah, because if you were growing up, if you were like an adult seeing this Airplane movie, you would on Robert Stack from Untouchables TV show, and in a noir, he's a very serious person. That's why we have the serious act. You have Lloyd Bridges, who didn't really do comedy until this movie, who did like Sea Hunt. Yep. Jeff Bridges' dad, if you know that. And I would mention like Robert Hayes, who was like kind of a no-name. In fact, he didn't really do it.
I think this was his first big time role. Like this was the first one where he had any like top billing, if you will, or in the cast list.
Yeah. And the homage of all those war movies where everybody leaves on the train and goodbye, darling.
Yeah, and I think what's great about movies like this, because it's almost like they threw so many jokes at the wall, knowing you'd miss them. You know, like no one, and it's kind of like when you throw things at the wall hoping something will stick. They're just hoping that one of the 10 jokes on screen at this moment makes you laugh. They don't all have to, but as long as they're successful with 1/10 of the jokes, you're still laughing along with the movie at a pretty reasonable rate. Whereas there are some comedies these days where like I kind of have this like laugh meter of like how many times I actually laughed during this movie, and I put on online this had a 2-laugh 90-minute runtime. Whereas this is kind of a case where I watch it and I see things again. I see things for the first time. Like I didn't notice when Peter Graves is standing by the magazines that there's a section called whacking material. I've never noticed it before.
You're not supposed to pay attention to what's the magazine rack on the Peter Graves.
I also didn't notice. I didn't notice when Kareem Abdul-Jabbar's character goes unconscious and they have to pull him out of the chair. He's wearing his basketball shorts. That kind of stuff. My wife's aunt works at the Mayo Clinic. And I didn't notice that until probably the last year, was that at the Mayo Clinic, there's just jars of mayonnaise behind him. Yeah. Like, it's just little things like that that you can come across after, this movie's been out for 40 years, you can come across and still laugh at for the first time. It's amazing. That
was the curse, because eventually after Airplane, they would do the TV show Police Squad.
Yeah.
And the reason why Police Squad got canceled was there was so much content. They did exactly what Airplane. So many jokes that they'd fly past you, and even the producers like, well, they didn't even catch all of them.
Yeah.
Which canceled the show, but then it got making kind of.
Yeah. Well, and the thing with Police Squad is that, you know, that the follow up to this, if you will, was very much would have survived in a time period of Arrested Development. I think Arrested Development was kind of during that time period where you could throw 30 jokes at the wall, see what sticks. And have that kind of humor. And again, Police Squad was one of those things like Airplane, gets better the more times you watch it.
Yeah.
And that's not really something you can do in 1980. Like, I mean, you'd have to wait till the film came out and just rent it over and over again. And it was kind of just a question of could you?
So, yeah, and I think how you film, it's almost, I think John Hughes would learn a lot from how to film comedy, right? When the jokes are stagnant, he knows how the camera like still.
Yep.
When it has to be animated, you know how to shake the camera, and the cross-cutting of editing, like Leslie Nielsen said his serious lines, and we cut to the background, like
Yeah.
So it's not only just the lines and the fun writing, but it's filmed and edited for comedic.
Yeah, well, and comedy and horror are very much two genres where timing is everything, more so than almost any other genre. And that's why you can get someone who works in the serious world, like Joseph F. Birock, who did the cinematography for this film, also did one of the Planet of the Apes movies. So he's done kind of that harder edge serious stuff, but then he did Blazing Saddles. So he's kind of got the timing element of the comedic jokes. Blazing Saddles kind of being a precursor to Airplane in some ways, where like some of the jokes are so hidden behind it, you're not really paying attention to them. So Airplane is one of those movies that it has that timing down so perfectly, and such a great runtime too. 88 minutes, it flies by.
So you're right, yeah, and the whole, I mean, obviously somebody has a stick and holding up the controls as he's...
Yes. Yeah.
So, right, I think you appreciate, what I'm trying to establish, you appreciate the film without ever seeing the disaster films, but if you see all the disaster films as a critique, it enhances the experience of seeing Airplane. You get to appreciate where it comes from.
Yeah, and that's one of the beautiful things about when you can do this dry humor and this parody and satire so well that you don't even have to have seen the movies. I'd seen disaster movies before watching Airplane, but Airplane was like a seminal classic in my home.
Okay.
I had never seen any of the airport movies. I hadn't seen them until we watched this for this show. We watched them for the first time. I grew up with Airplane first. And then as I filled in the cracks with those disaster movies, the jokes became funnier because I had seen them play out that way. So it adds a level of nuance to it every single time, which is something that, again, it just makes it wholly rewatchable.
You know what? And eventually, there is a sequel to this.
Airplane 2, the sequel.
The sequel, right. Which we should critique a little bit later. And there's nothing wrong with that. It was just, it's just not going to get the attention that this one got.
Well, and that surprised me. I actually, because it's been at least 20 years since I've seen Airplane 2. And I'm sure in my life I have seen it beginning to end at some point. I have no real memory of it, because it was kind of interchangeable in the house with like Airplane and Airplane 2. They're basically the same movie in a lot of ways. And I didn't realize that Abraham Zucker did not work on the sequel because they felt we had given everything we could to this kind of genre in the first movie. So they actually kind of took a step back and didn't work on the sequel. I thought they were involved in it. So I was
it's the same kind of setup, the same kind of camera, the same kind of jokes and everything. That's a little bit surprising.
Yeah, so I'm sure that they had some sort of producerial kind of work behind where it's like, we'll let you kind of run with it. But that's also something they did with The Naked Gun, was that they worked on the script for the third film but didn't actually step in to direct it. They actually took a step back and kind of let someone else take some free reign of it. And so that's where you can kind of tell those differences in those sequels. Is there's a special kind of touch that I think Zaz and Mel Brooks are like the kings of, this kind of satirical comedy to me.
Yeah.
And they make films that are unlike any other kind of comedy, even from each other.
Well, yeah, because they don't mind grabbing for the low-hanging fruit, the gutter jokes.
Yes.
And then they go to the upper class, and then they go to the nostalgia pieces of, I remember all that stuff. And as well as using the same formula that they learned being writers for, like, the Caesar Show, for Milton Berle, the same knock-em-up jokes and hit 'em up, knock 'em down. And that's probably why they hired Robert Hayes. He's kind of a straight guy.
Yeah. Well, again,
the lead guy
having a whole lot of comedic background because he wasn't really have any background, but being able to play it as seriously as possible. And little jokes that even the ones that you kind of like you groan, you still groan because they're funny. Like the drinking problem. As a child, I didn't get the joke. I was like, why is he always doing that to himself? And then getting older, catching that line early on where he said, that's where my drinking problem began, and then seeing it play out over and over. It's even joked about before they actually speak about the drinking problem.
I know.
Before you know what it is, you know what it is.
I've actually watched a lot of people first-time reaction to Airplane, and a lot of them still miss that joke. It's entire new flying altogether, and they say it back to them, and a lot of people miss that joke.
Yes.
Too, right?
Well, and and things like the cockpit. What is it? Like that kind of thing. You don't have to get them all at the same time, though. But when you revisit, when you watch it again, and that's why I said it was so much fun watching these YouTube videos of people watching the film for the first time, because I'm jealous of them that I'll never get to experience this movie for the first time again.
Right, because we've seen it, we've grown, both of us kind of grow up just watching it, and then eventually we understand the funny as an adolescent. The Girl Scouts duking it out and nobody gives a crap.
Yeah. Well, I still think my favorite sequence from that, from the flashbacks, is the guy getting stabbed at the disco club.
He's got a very obvious pad.
He's dancing and she thinks he's doing a new move and she kind of gets into it. Oh man, just so many parts of the movie that
Now, I had a relative tell me that is Igor's uncle. And I believed him as a kid because he watched this and then he watched Young Frankenstein. Yeah.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So overall, I think like this is it's not my favorite of this group of directors. I still think number one of their film list has got to be The Naked Gun for me, just because that was one I grew up with before Airplane even. Like I remember before being old enough to understand any of the jokes, I found Leslie Nielsen to be so engaging and so funny. And again, didn't know for most of my youth that he was known as a dramatic actor before he took on these roles. And this is the kind of thing he wanted. He was worried about getting grandpa roles at this stage of his career. And so he was like, well, I've got to try and reinvent himself. And he did, in fact. Like, you can tell there's a certain love that he has for playing the comedic role straight. I mean, he carried a whoopee cushion around through all of his like comedic films and would just launch one off whenever he felt like he needed to get kind of people to liven up a bit.
But if you watch his performance, he's trying to win an Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and he should have. I maintain that Ordinary People, the Best Picture winner from 1980s, got nothing on Airplane. So
that's a bad pick for Best Picture. I could pick a lot of other options for 1979.
Yeah. If we ever get a time machine, we'll go fix that.
Robert Redford. Right. Yeah. But yeah, because I think that's what works. Because you put serious people who've done serious film, and just don't do it for the jokes. Just do you're so used to doing your serious lines that just work with it.
Yeah. Well, and even looking at some of the jokes that you could make an argument have kind of aged. You know, the jive talking scene. You could make an argument that that's pretty aged. I guess the white hero of Ted Stryker teaching African Americans how to play basketball, and then them immediately being better at it than him. Yeah. Or the I like my coffee like I like my men joke. Like so many of those kind of racially insensitive ones have aged. But I think there's kind of a level of, again, where it's not like intentionally trying to harm a group of people, but playing off of the expectations of the time. So I don't know. I could see those things not working for certain people. One of the people that I had watched on YouTube seeing it for the first time was kind of like taken aback by that humor. And I was like, I don't think it was meant in jest, but I could see how that stuff has aged a little bit poorly.
And I think you have to to appreciate it. I think this is one of those, you have to be alive around the time to actually appreciate it more than a lot of people just looking back on it.
Or being willing to kind of let it happen. Because, we talked about this with, I guess comparing it to Soap Dish, that humor didn't work, the more offensive stuff at the end of the film. I just don't think those jokes worked. No. Whereas these jokes are funny, and they do kind of have that, take it easy kind of effect to it. I make the stance, any joke can be funny. Anything you make fun of can work. It's just whether or not, I think the tougher stuff is that kind of envelope, PC kind of stuff, where it starts to get to a level of, if you don't do it right, it becomes really offensive. And I think there's kind of a level of appreciation for what they're making fun of.
But selling Tupperware to the...
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Tupperware group. So, have you seen Airplane? You gotta do it right. Airplane.
Yeah, we want to know your thoughts about it. Comment down below if you've seen Airplane and what you think about it. And also, I'd love to know maybe if you can remember what's the first year you watched Airplane, because I'm interested to see this film's lasting impact as a comedy classic, and I want to know when you saw it for the first time. I would probably gauge my first viewing experience probably mid to late 90s was when I first experienced this film, because it was, I think it was one where I actually was paying attention as I was watching and not just on in the background.
Because I remember as a kid I watched Jaws, and then he put this in, and you're like, well, where are we going with this? I thought this was what are we doing? Right?
Yeah. Oh, and side note too, I think the airplane effects in this film are better than they were in Airport 1970. Just going to throw that out there. Even though it's the Jaws joke.
Yeah.
But let us know in the comments section down below what you thought about the film. Don't forget too, you guys can also like and subscribe. The like helps us out a lot.
It does.
The subscribe helps you out a lot, because that way you don't have to worry about missing an episode of Kyle and Nick on Film. We're on twice a week right now, so you don't want to miss those episodes on Mondays, on Thursdays. Who knows down the road the kind of content we'll be adding for you. Speaking of content we're adding for you, don't forget to check out the Patreon as well.
Yeah.
The link is down in the description.
Tell us what to do, man.
Yeah, patreon.com/Kyle and Nick on Film. We love getting your feedback. We love just you guys telling us what movies to watch, because there's a lot of tough options out to pick movies. You do the work. But once again, thank you guys for watching so much. You can find all my film reviews. I'm over 1,000 film reviews on GoatFilmReviews.com right now. Over 1,000, which means that I've watched like a third of all the films I've ever seen have been recorded on GoatFilmReviews.com. So check that out.
All right. This is pretty, we're going to do this episode quick and fast like Airplane. So it's one of our shortest ones. So what the hell?
Yeah. So assume crash positions. Nick, let's get in crash positions.
All right, yeah.